Okay. Thank you again. Where did he go? Oh, there. Thank you, Matt, for your speech, and also I would say your approach to handling the discussion here. For you guys, we met early on, in December last year, and had a chat about how we would do it. So really appreciate that, the legality of it. We have an intro slide, but it's fine to skip over that for now. So the principal idea of our paper that was discussing the bifurcation, which is obviously a really topical topic for us as the new new name of EPOG. So the concept of the bifurcation actually comes from ecology, and it's this general idea that a qualitative change in a system could kind of lead to many outcomes, not just two potentially. And that we face, and when we bring it into kind of the political ecology sector, we think of it as, we're facing this kind of global system crisis where one angle could be collapse of our ecology, collapse of the planetary system, and the other one is a sustainable future that we recreate for ourselves.
Yes, and so this paper that Matt has given us to properly introduce in the discussion tries to critique this concept of a bifurcation from an anarchist perspective. So they're kind of asking, okay, well, if the political ecologists say there's two options, collapse or ecology, does it mean that, what is can capital bifurcate too? So can capitalism still exist on the path where we have an ecology, right? So yeah, it kind of goes over this argument of the ecologists that they're against the destructive mode of production, but what if there's a not that destructive mode of production without this extractivism, but it's still capitalist? Basically, do they consider this scenario at all in their critique of capitalism? And yeah, do they even consider this possibility that maybe there's other kinds of accumulation, other kinds of valorization that is then not connected to nature, but then a second nature, which is then maybe data, or just a basically capital breaking away from biophysical foundations, but still finding ways to be reproduced. So yes, this is then broadly the idea of the paper, and it goes also uses a lot of philosophical concepts of is this even a possibility or not? And then yeah, we don't have time to go into the details, but we can also send the paper if you're interested. Yes, so yeah, and based on that, Matt's gonna talk a little about connecting it to some other ideas.
Yeah, so the concept of this was not critique necessarily, but food for thought from how you would rethink or think differently about the anarchist ideas. So I'm going to be potentially a master's in a couple of months in socio-ecological economics. That's the degree we get from Vienna. And socio-ecological economics, as the name suggests, really seeks to kind of bring together the ideas of how do we analyze social structures and mechanisms of power in the context of capitalism, and the biophysical foundations of capitalism. So how do we kind of approach the planetary system and bring them together? And that's the kind of idea behind the name. That's why it includes both socio and ecological in the economics. So the core philosophical, so what I would argue is that socio-ecological economics brings both an analytical framework and a kind of philosophical foundation to contribute to this kind of anarchist analysis of power. Just very simply, it's obviously kind of a little complicated, and I'd admit I'm not a master in it, that it has this idea of structure, which is kind of the forces which guide behavior in society. So these are our structures, and mechanisms, the idea are the actual kind of things that are creating the effects and the events in society. So to give you an example that's kind of relevant to anarchist economics, you're going to have to do a lot of clicking. So anarchists might view the structure of society to be capitalism, the state, and you've done, so it's all right, as the capitalism, and the state monopoly on power is the structure in which we operate, through these other kind of countervailing mechanisms, which might be the militarization of the police, which might, the mechanism through which these structures play out might be the crackdown on climate protests, and the outcome of that, what we kind of are witnessing in society, might be the loss of the ability to challenge the government on climate concerns and the perpetuation of environmental destruction. So I guess from the critical realist, from the socio-ecological economics point of view, it's not sufficient merely to address the mechanism, which is the crackdown on climate protests, but also to address the structures, which is the issues with capitalism and the violence of the state. Next one. So yeah, the question I'm asking is, what can anarchism and socio-ecological economics kind of learn from each other, and what is the interplay between them? So just to get into the next part of our discussion, which is about the examples and applications of anarchism. So Matt went through a couple of different examples, but I just wanted to highlight that there are a couple, there are a lot of movements and a lot of diversity in the way in which anarchism presents itself in the modern world. So Graeber, he mentioned Graeber, and Graeber talks about this idea of consensus. So consensus is a non-hierarchical way of making decisions that makes sure everyone kind of has a voice and agrees to something. The Danish commune is an example in Denmark, obviously, and it has they live in these like non-hierarchical, mutual assistance kind of manners. So that's kind of a way of structuring society, and then it's also a movement. And we mentioned the Spanish Civil War, and the anarcho-feminist militia that operated and fought during the Spanish Civil War as well. Next one. So because of this, we were kind of questioning to ourselves, is anarchism vague? Like, what does it actually stand for and not just opposing to vague senses of power? So I just have a few things. So first of all, the anarchist rejects economy, but anarchism is very diverse in its anti-capitalist tradition. The papers that we read, it's endeavored to give voice to the movement, but they reject any form of representation, so they don't want their papers to attempt to represent anarchism. Anarchism is opposed to all forms of hierarchy, but Proudhon, the one of the influential thinkers in anarchism, wrote more than 500 pages of blatant misogyny and anti-feminism. Opposition to capitalism is foundational, but there is no shared agreement among anarchists about what capitalism actually is. So they're against something that they're not really sure, don't agree on what it actually is. And exploitation is made possible by private property, but of course there's plenty of disagreement about how to draw the lines around what exactly property is. From the anarchist syndicalists, they see these advantages in cooperation enterprises, but of course other anarchists say these economic arrangements could lead to the development of class society itself. And finally, is there one more? Yeah. Anarchist communism, these like labels about the kind of bringing together anarchists and other forms of ideology, and of course there's a movement in anarchism without adjectives. So is anarchism vague? We're going to spend kind of in the next couple of moments thinking about what is that strong or weak, and does that provide some value? Did I have something next? I think I'm handing it over. Yeah.
So having in mind what Matt just mentioned about how vague is anarchism, we tried to select that it's exactly the same topic as you did in your presentation, so it's good that we connected. We used the monopoly of violence to see how the anarchist authors deal with that, how they address the situation. So the first definition of monopoly of violence was made by Weber, in which the state has the legitimacy to use the physical force in their own territory, but for the anarchist, the state is not even, is not legitimized for them, and it's just another way to do oppressive, perpetuating domination. So we saw some of the critiques for anarchism asking exactly this question: how would order and punishment be in an anarchist society? We identified some of these authors to see how they deal with that. And the first slide of Matt, it was exactly this citation that says that while anarchist doesn't say that there's not going to be a robbery or violence, they say the state is just reaffirming that there's going to be some people that will do this, some people that will be violent. So the way that these authors see is that through cooperation, solidarity, there is supposed not to be space for that, but in moments that there is some violence that we have, they do say that maybe a mediation, that it's recognized among them will be necessary. Also some practices to rebuild trust and having a mutual recognition of the benefits as an anarchist society can have. Now, furthering what Matt said, we try to identify the strengths and the weaknesses, not only looking at the violence as a topic, but also in what we have been looking and learning of anarchism in the last couple of months. So the first is strength. So as we said a couple of times, the opposition to hierarchy, any type of hierarchy. And this kind of promotes a positive political approach to justice, freedom, equality, and solidarity. Because anarchists are suspicious of power and hierarchy, it opens to have certain checks and balances on how it's being done inside this anarchist movements, actions, or the other types that anarchists can be delivered or done. And during our talks, and also what Matt mentioned, the space, anarchism doesn't offer a framework or a path to go through, but also there's a space for thinking collectively, maybe can be the potential radicality that anarchism offers in the way that we can build these utopian alternatives and designing and restructuring what we think that should be socially, economically, and ecologically speaking.
Yeah, and just quickly to finish with some weaknesses, like what's wrong with that? Matt mentioned some of these critiques as well. Obviously, the broadness and vagueness of anarchism can mean that there are some bad anarchists, people who like misappropriate or appropriate the kind of ideas of individualism in anarchism to, you know, espouse, capitalist hierarchy or patriarchal hierarchy that are, you know, are perpetuated in kind of a strong, you know, social Darwinist kind of way. This idea that anarchists can step on their own feet, which he mentions, this idea of means and ends. Anarchist movements need an idea, a pathway for change, and also an idea for what the future of kind of society looks like, and the need to, even having a critique of having visions of the future of society is problematic for anarchists. So there's this idea that like promoting change can be quite difficult. And on that same note, unifying a very broad movement with different ideas, with different conceptions. Matt already mentioned as well that that even though the communists and the anarchists share a lot of kind of things in common, that didn't always lead to this perfect happy union. So there's these issues about unification under the ideals of anarchism.
Yeah. So in the last part of our discussion, we kind of want to come back to the title a little bit. So as Matt and Marina talked about, there are many different things about what anarchism means, and economics can also obviously also mean many different things. So in this next section, we focus on anarchism not like an academic program, but as a practice, and then economics as a science of understanding the economy, which we do in EPOG mostly. This is how we engage with economics, right? So yeah, we were supposed to be prepared for systemic change. Can you go on? Yes, so, and I want to connect it to the discussion about means and ends, right? So if the ends are that we are all being prepared for systemic change, what are the means that EPOG is doing to achieve that? So first the question, yeah, so like, as we can all probably attest to, there's like quite a lot of like control over the time that we spend in this program. So I think it was also raised during the ecological challenges, which I found like a really cool point, and I wanted to get this, like draw this up again. This, there's not much space for engagement anymore, right? We hold presentations about different experiences, how people are engaged in like transforming this society, but most of us have probably stopped doing this kind of engagement in EPOG because there's no space for it, there's no freedom to explore this. Can you on? And then, can you go back, please? Yes, and then also because it is quite intense, it is like really, yeah, there's like the structure is very strong, and it kind of also excludes people who are not able to function in the structure. So I guess it's also like a bit of a question of like ableism, of like if you're not able to function in the structure of EPOG, you're kind of excluded from it, right? So then this doesn't even allow you to be part of the systemic change because you're excluded from the structure. And even if you function within the structure, you are shaped by this experience. And yeah, I guess it's an open question to all of us. What does it mean to be in this environment where now everything's very hierarchical? We're like kind of, yeah, we'll get to the attendance sheet. And what does this mean for our ability to then question power later on in our lives as the people who are supposed to be part of the systemic change, to learn? Thank you for that. Yes, so I guess, yeah, the question is if we're supposed to like be part of a liberating progressive agenda, are we making these experiences in a liberating way or in an oppressive way? It's an open question, let's say that.
So going on the title of our presentation, no God, no boss, no husband. What about no attendance sheet, maybe? Yeah, God. Should we get it? Okay, so just to summarize and maybe finishing the point that we want to do with in reading this presentation, the attendance sheet and how small practice can make a place in the systemic change, as Rika already mentioned. So attendance sheet can be seen as another surveillance mechanism. So it reinforces this external control over our presence, but also a bit of a lack of trust in the individuals involved. Also maybe bringing to the discussion the attendance sheet, because it does have our names, our surnames, our countries involved. So does it, just for us to debate, is it a way to maybe create more relationship with students and the administration, or is it another way to, another tool to maybe reinforce and surveillance mechanism as well? We brought some of the potential solutions for that, maybe more meaningful engagement within the joint seminars, voluntary participation, for instance, maybe selecting a number of joint seminars that are most correlated to our thesis, or trust-based system as well. But just to finalize that, we don't have time, but we were thinking about how the small practices, that it's what we can do now as EPOGers maybe, and also open to discuss what can we do, what are these small practices that we are able to do. For instance, rearranging the city in the way that it's more horizontal and a conversation than merely just a presentation done it vertically, but also maybe some more violent, radical attitudes towards the attendance sheet maybe, but in a way that how do we fit and how do we see ourselves playing a part in this systemic change as EPOGers and later in life as well. Thank you.
Just this question? Yeah. So, we've decided to follow some of the structures, I guess. In that, like based on these three parts that we have in the discussion, there are kind of three questions that if you want to react to anything, feel free to. Yeah. Yeah, we can read them. Should I read them? Yeah. I'm going to read them. No one ever reads the questions. So the first question comes from like this first part from the bifurcation. What can anarchism and socio-ecological economics learn from each other? The second one, how would anarchist systems prevent the creation of new hierarchies in economic, social, and environmental relations? And third, what does it mean to resist and reject authority and power as an EPOGer within hierarchical institutions?
I think it's hard to talk with David here, but no, just joking. For the first joker, I don't really know. It depends on what do you mean by sociological economy. If it's academia, of course, they can reinforce themselves. I think most of anarchists are anthropologists or sociologists, or they are all doing this kind of stuff. And I think it's important to base our action on some reflection to think together. So, of course, perhaps something that is not in the other way around is like how certain practices or the study of how important it is to have a look at Rojava. So many things that we talked about in structure, the United States, China, many big things, and there's stuff happening. I learned a lot during this seminar of actual practices and people doing stuff. How do they manage to tackle conflict? And we never mentioned that, so perhaps study more in depth this kind of counter example that we don't have, because they are inspiring, and we can see also the errors and the failures that they had. Hierarchies. So I do think you have some hierarchies, like always. It's not exactly a matter of hierarchies. It's like how this hierarchy is legitimate or not. Like, of course, when we have, I don't know, do you take Extinction Rebellion or whatever collective, they would have working group, and then decide, like the strategy group will decide what we do, and all the others will do what they decide. Us, like it's a working group, it's sociocracy. Like you trust the group for the decision they made, so you have a form of hierarchy. But you try to legitimize this hierarchy and to avoid remaining hierarchies. You know, this thing about having roles that change. Like if you are doing this for 2 years, maybe next year you change role, even if you're not an expert, because you're taking power by doing that. So how to control this kind of hierarchies and be sure that if you have a delegate, so we decide together on something specific, we have a delegate that will do this decision, we are able to remove it if the first error he does. For EPOG, what does it mean to reject and resist authority and power as an EPOGer within her? Yeah, I think that's a very tricky question, because EPOG has been created to create this like new alternative elite that are supposed to go in a reformist institution, like to go in the cracks of the structure in order to see how we can change some stuff in there. So it's inherently a hierarchical and position of power, and I think we have to question ourselves. That's the thing. Like being in the structure, being aware. Like I was in the World Bank last year, and I was like super against at the beginning, like World Bank, what they did with the Global South, what they did with Haiti, what they did, like so many things. But I went there. And I was so radical at the beginning. At the end of the year, I was like, there's people that are clever, interesting. Because smoothly, when you start to be in an institution, you avoid your radicality, because you understand that many people, when you work with so many countries, you have to compromise yourself. So, you justify this compromission. So being aware that going in certain institution, we're going to compromise ourselves and try to think about what were my ideas at the beginning is really important. And I think so. Going there, it's fine. I think it's important. It's something important. Going to the big institution to understand how it works, but just we get have in mind that it's hurtful. It's not neutral. It's not that you go and then you're going to change. They're going to change yourself. So be aware of that, I think, and question this own authority, this own power that we are getting in those institutions.
How are we doing to the questions? Am I doing this? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Charlie from the United Kingdom. I think so I'll sort of say where perspective this is coming from. I'm pretty skeptical about anarchism as like an idea. And something that's really topical in the UK at the moment, because he was sentenced yesterday. In the summer of last year, not even a man, a 17-year-old, went into a children's Taylor Swift dance class and killed a 6-year-old girl, a 7-year-old girl, and a 9-year-old girl. Under anarchism, how would this man first be detained, and stopping the initial crime, and then sort of kept back from committing these crimes further on? And I personally think this is someone who is like beyond saving. In interviews since with the police, he said he's glad those girls are dead, and one of the girls got stabbed 122 times. So there really are some people in society who just do like horrific crimes. So yeah, under anarchism, how would that be dealt with?
Hi, I'm Nikhil Rampal. I'm from India, and I have a question on. So anarchism, the times in the history that we talked about, is also from the times of colonialism and the history when democracies did not exist in very strong forms. So, like the example of Bhagat Singh that you gave us was during the British colonialism. So, the underlying feature of anarchy to exist or persist should be like everybody has like-mindedness, which is completely missing. So if you want to be an anarchist, like how does it work? Because there's no thought process that matches. For example, when Luigi Mangione shot the United Healthcare CEO, there was difference of opinions, and that is a very natural trait of a democracy, which did not exist back in the day. So how does this anarchist model, where do you draw the line between democracy and anarchy, where people are electing their representatives versus they're killing people who they don't agree with? The question was, where do we draw the line? Like, because in democracies, it will be very hard for anarchists or anarchy to persist. Like, it wouldn't be a crime between, like drawing the lines between anarchy and crime.
You can do the next one.
Hi, Daniela from El Salvador. I just really wanted maybe a clarification question, because on your last slide you mentioned that it's like this rejection of the notion of reproductive work. And coming from like a Marxist feminist perspective, it's crucial to kind of recognize the reproductive work and within everything of the care work structure and all that you were mentioning. So I really want to understand the logic coming from like an anarchist position to reject this notion, and what is the proposal in that sense.
Okay, first I speak for myself. I don't speak for anarchism. And also there's a lot of stuff in a way that I don't know many things. It's been sometimes that I'm reading, but of course there's a lot of opening questions when you think of like doing an anarchist society. What would it mean? For instance, concerning crime. First, crime exists because there is a law and a state. If there is no law and state, there's no crime. There's conflict. And the idea of anarchists, like what I read, some of them are explaining that we are building a society that first provide an environment in which you have less stress, less issues, like when you're more free and equal, you're gonna have less violence, less conflict. Of course, you've seen this. If you take a suburb that is poor, you have violence that is more important. So tackling violence and crimes in itself at the root, so avoiding an environment that push for crime, for conflict. Then I can't say what concerning killing. I do invite you to have a look at the Reddit I mentioned before, because there is like 2 or 3 threads where you have a lot of sources, and I don't want to say shit. I rather prefer you to have a good look at that. As that's something, I didn't really prepare, but people thought about that, and I don't want to say shit. Concerning reproductive work, so it's a provocation by Graeber again, that basically say that Marx explained that capitalism will collapse because it's alienating workers. And you have feminist people, Silvia Federici, for instance, that explain that Marx forgot completely reproductive work. And if capitalism didn't collapse, it's because reproductive work and domestic work is being done every day, and reproducing workers. What Graeber did say is that in a society we have to produce human. Like economy is here to produce human, good quality human, with which we want to do stuff together, to share some stuff. So it's not reproductive work, it's productive work. That's the most productive work that exists, care and domestic. So it's just like syntactic. It's a joke from him. And I would like to open a discussion also. I don't know, but yeah.
I don't know. Maybe something on this question. What you asked about crime and so on. I don't know. I'm just intervening now because I'm also like in this process of reading about this I listened to like a podcast where someone was also talking about avenues that maybe anarchists should think about more, because this idea of, oh, people will be free, there will be less violence anyways, right? So that there are also some communal justice concepts, for example, like in, I don't know, black communities, for example, when the crime happens, you don't call the police because you know the police is just gonna make everything worse. So there are some communities where there are really like a lot of concepts that have been used for like a longer time that work on like a more community-based justice approach. This, I mean, it's like a pretty extreme example, which I emphasize with that this is something where we're just like valid to push the anarchists on. Yeah, just to contribute maybe. Yeah, should we just, I mean, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah from the US. We had a class on commons where we learned about like how to make commons function and the difference between the tragedy of the commons and how it's not really a tragedy and stuff. But like one of the principles of the commons is kind of necessary exclusion and boundaries. You can't have infinite commons where everybody's totally welcome, because then that's where the idea of tragedy of the commons comes from, is that with no stake and with no mutual agreement and like social contract, I guess, between people, then you would likely have a collapse and exploitation and, again, a hierarchical system in place. So in terms of anarchism, which is based on individuality and like kind of freedom, how would you draw boundaries and like protect that system when it's all about individual people, like versus a commons structure?
Hi, this is Jocelyn from Costa Rica. My question is about like the current global scenario where we have like more control and more surveillance from people that were not elected by the citizens. In that kind of scenarios where like they have the control of our data, they have the control of all these, like all the lives, how, like, which lessons can be learned from the anarchist perspective, and if there is any, like, example that have been, like, fighting in this scenario. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Malika. I'm from Tajikistan, and I have two kind of broad but general questions. The first one is, you know, like by nature, some of the people, they are leaders, some of the other people, they are followers. So I would like to know what is the perspective, from the anarchy about the people who are more like followers, like they would like to be guided, not necessarily because they don't know or they are not aware, but like it's their own preference. And the second one is very related to, somehow related to Sarah's question. It's very hard for me to imagine a world where anarchy could work, especially from the economic perspective, where we talk about the management of scarce resources. So I would like to know the managerial part of the story when it comes to resource management.
Thank you. Great question. On surveillance and control, so I'm going to give an example that I think is pretty interesting. For instance, if you have a group that is working together, like cooperatives, and you said, okay, we don't surveil the time at which you arrive in the morning. So we let people like controlling themselves, having this power of deciding when they come. If after 3 months or 4 months there's one guy that never come, and he's benefiting from I don't know, the money that he's making the company, at some point you have assembly. We're like, my friend, it's a collective thing. Either you are part of it or either you're not part of it. You're free to exit. You're free to move and go find somewhere where you can not work and win money. But here it's shared principle. So this idea of like self-surveillance as well. It's like we're not like controlling each self, but at some point we can see that somebody is not working with us. So it's like collective discussion and saying, okay, do you really want to be part? Okay, so if you want to be part, let's see, but come and work with us, at least what is reasonable, right? So I do think this is the kind of approach, philosophy that can help to reduce the risk of people that cheat in many systems. You always have some people that cheat, but that's also the question for allocation. You know, when you have unemployment benefit, you're gonna have people that cheat, that work and does not say to the state, and either you restrict the access to this benefit, so everybody is doomed, or otherwise, that's the question of how do we do? How do we do? It's better that everybody will benefit together, having higher benefit, but of course you're gonna have some of them that cheat. That if we focus on the people that cheat, everybody will be worsened. Like we'll have issues. Instead, if we I think that's one of the ways. And we are fine if 3 people is not working in a society as well. This feeling about we don't have to all work. Also, we do all agree that with the machinery we have the industrial revolution that happened. Also, all the technology we have. There's a lot of work that is completely useless that we are doing. Like this is well explained also in bullshit jobs from REIMER. And concerning what was the thing? Yeah. Of course, you don't want to force participation. If you have, for instance, in Java, a community or people that don't want to participate to the decision, political decision, it's fine. Like we don't want to force. But the purpose is to go towards more people are interested by deciding, because of course they will see that some decisions are being made, and you are suffering from this decision. So you are pushed to participate to this. For the division of labor question, a very interesting question, on yes, scarcity, resources, large-scale trade. That's where, so at the beginning I was into individualist. I tried to follow chronologically the different thoughts of anarchists. And I also was into anti-industrialist approach and what is called primitivist anarchist. And basically they say, okay, industrial structure are bad in itself because it's hierarchical. You have authority, and I think this is wrong. This is completely wrong to think that. We do need a division of labor. It's not possible all to be completely autonomous to make our bread. I don't know if you already watched this video where one guy tried to do a pen, for instance. But a pen from the material and all the tools that you need to do a pen. You can't. Of course, you have a division of labor. And that's where anarcho-communist people like Kropotkin talk about collectivist system, in which you have Marxism also in there. And of course, you have hierarchies. And as I said, I shift a bit from this individualism early 19th towards anarcho-communism, because they provide some answers concerning trade, and yeah, I'll stop there.
I was just going to mention to notice that Matt and us, we had a discussion about how we wanted this discussion to go, and how we kind of had to explain how structured it is and how hierarchical it is, right? The idea that the implicit question is we all ask questions because we don't know something, and then the speaker comes in and they know the answer to those questions, so we ask them answer those questions. And I don't know, I guess, as Matt kind of already indicated earlier, I guess I would find value, and I always find value from what other people in the course have to say and what they already know about. As I have talking to my colleagues over lunch, over books they've read on anarchism already. Did anyone else want to say something? Sorry, I missed. Oh, sorry. Fine, your first question for this year.
Okay, so I have a very small reflection and then a question, a very punctual question. The first one is about individual anarchism and the fact that trust is based on facts and not ideas. And it has an emotional component to it that is not rational. So how do you conjugate the thing of like, I have to trust you because what you say, your ideas are in certain way, but I don't have elements to trust you based on facts. Number 2, in the presentation, you mentioned this Murray Bookchin, if I'm not mistaken, who said that the problem was hierarchies in the ecological crisis we're right now. Yet in Graeber, they mention a lot of examples of hierarchical societies that actually worked. So is hierarchies the problem?
Anybody want to say something?
Well, I'm Enzo from Brazil. Currently reading Kropotkin in La Conquête du Pain. And I found it particularly interesting when he's talking about provision of goods. Sorry? Yeah. From the beginning or? Okay, yeah. When he's talking about the provision of goods. And like after the revolution to then like provide the workers with goods, like tools rather than money, because money would lose its intrinsic value. And I found it very interesting, but the thing that I couldn't fully understand, or maybe you can have some thoughts on it, is how would money work in an anarchist society? Because as in today we have, well, central banks that are fundamentally linked to this hierarchy and the state. So how would money work? Would it be like shifted more towards like a barter society? Or yeah, well, how would money work?
Hello, my name is Aaron from Mexico. I had a comment maybe also on what Sarah said about the commons. We had to read an article in one of our classes on fisheries and the tragedy of the commons. And one distinction that I'd like to make is that they didn't really have an issue with commons until there was a way to exploit it, like a channel to need more fish. And otherwise with some things, like why would there ever get to a problem of the commons if I'm just fishing as much as I need to consume? So how would this tie with what you were mentioning about establishing the basic needs and covering the basic needs of a community in order to maybe avoid this this tragedy of then establishing, like in that case it was globalization that brought some foreign actors that would then open channels for perhaps using more fish than you needed. And connecting it with Enzo, how would then something like universal basic goods look in a framework of anarchism in the provision and organization and maybe also management of everybody getting their needs covered? And I really like the format, I agree.
Okay, again, if people feel that they want to answer some stuff, please do so. Because it's always a super good question. I don't know many things about that. So concerning trust, Joaquin, what you said, of course, that's what I said, like prefiguration. Like we have to act in a way that is what we are supposed to aim as a goal. So if you are always in mutual aid, you help the others, you're gonna get trust, of course. It's a process, of course. It's not my ideas and say, okay, follow me, and then it's like together it's a process where we try to create a community in which we build trust. Concerning hierarchies, I think it's an endless debate, but hierarchies, as I said, I think there's legitimate and non-legitimate hierarchies. Sometimes it's way more efficient to have these hierarchies because we don't want to spend each day like an hour on at what time we're going to start the course together and do debate. Of course, there are many things that are common, that accepted, that are in a way oppressive as well. But yeah, we have to live in the way. Otherwise, it's just impossible. Concerning money. Money is there's a lot of debates within anarchist debate and thinkers. So first, I would like to say, to be an anarchist, it's a process. It's not like we have this goal and I know what is the best goal because this is Marxist-Leninist, and it brings to bureaucracy and authority. Instead, we're like, okay, we question stuff, and we want to see what we can try. So of course, people say, probably in a society without money would be good for many reasons. During the Spanish Revolution, they did it. So the question on provision and basic needs, for them, it was the war effort. So they had to do the war effort. So they have to run the farms and agriculture to provide the basic needs for the community, but also to do the war against Franco. So I can't say how you measure basic need, but it depends on the structure, the community, the scale you're talking about, and then people have to. Yeah. Right now.
Yeah. So in the Graeber book, he mentioned many examples of societies in North America in which money existed, but was just used as a way to make exchanges easier, not as a way to accumulate value. So they had money and they used it to make transactions, but there was no value in accumulating it. So that's another way of keeping money without keeping the things the way they are.
And definitely today, like if we have a leftist Democrat, socialist Democrat that increase the minimum wage for workers, anarchists would be happy. Like, of course, it's a process, as I said. So we take what we can take. Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt, sorry. Also, a lot of men have been speaking of observations. Yeah, maybe another observation I'm having and how experiences shape us is that there was no reminder to say your name and country today, and yet a lot of people said their name and country, which I think saying that your name is nice, country is maybe a bit weird sometimes.
A lot of anarchists think writers write about
Yeah. No, but I think it's interesting because why do we say our country? Do we want to share that we are very international? Or does it make it easier on the sheet where they note the quality of our contributions to say where we're from, in case they didn't understand the name? Just a reflection. Yeah.
Thank you for the comment, Rike. Hi, I'm Chitnan, and I'm going to say that I'm from India because the question that I'm going to ask is kind of related, and maybe that's the reason why people also mention. Yeah. So you were saying repeatedly that hierarchies in anarchism need to be legitimized, and there have to be systems where hierarchies are like important because like you need something that's commonly agreed upon. But coming from India and seeing, I mean, we had this example of an elder having the hierarchy to control and protect the child because at that point we really needed that for the child. But those systems also become very anti-feminist, and have experienced that myself and also seen that happening a lot. So at what point do you think legitimizing a particular hierarchy is good and is all right, but then also does not become anti-feminist? And then if it is becoming, or not just anti-feminist, but wrong in the general sense, if it's not anymore legitimate, how do you then overthrow that hierarchy?
Should we give the microphone to David?
David from France. I have two questions. One is about Rojava, because you mentioned that it's a quite large region with sub-regions, and most of the power goes at local level. But at one point, what makes also Rojava is the army. And I wanted to understand, I mean, if you know, how do they organize the delegation of power? Because usually in an army, fighting against ISIS and against, I mean, different governments around, they probably have some kind of delegation and hierarchy. And at one point, I mean, it can be far from self-organization. So how do they manage this kind of potential contradiction, if there is one? And another thing is, maybe it will partly answer some of the messages maybe you sent. But I will make a kind of metaphor. I'm currently involved in a movement in Paris to try to have a kind of, for the next municipal election in 2026, to try to organize like citizen movements, trying to gather together citizens and left-wing parties to try to win Paris, and at least not to leave Paris on the right side. And at one point, I mean, we launched this initiative where, let's say, 10 people, and other people came inside, and they, I mean, they did a lot, and it's great what they did, and they did so much, and I did not have, and many others did not have much time to work as they could. At the same time, they could invest, and at one point, of course, they did great job, but they got also kind of legitimacy that the others do not have. And so it's rather difficult in this type of organization, democracy. It works well. It's not a critique, but it's how can you deal with the people that have lots of time to invest and get strong legitimacy, and others that cannot invest the same amount of time, and so they don't have the same legitimacy. And of course, the decisions then are made by everyone. But when you decide the agenda of the General Assembly, when you organize the General Assembly, when you have the attendance sheet, when you have more power.
Yeah, it was just a question about 2 rounds ago. Sorry, it was on crime. I think an example could be during the old regime in France. The small towns used to organize the police with neighbors. So not in the big cities because like they already had state militias, but in the towns. Sorry, I don't remember the names of the neighbor police, but it was usually made for ecological purpose to clean the mess in the town, if I can say, and also for the crime. So maybe it can give like an option of a committee organized on crime. And yeah, another question I wanted to ask, I think it was also linked to the commons, is I just don't understand still well the rejection of economics, because I felt like that the commons and of the movement was like this, the heart of the anarchist economics. So I don't know if you can give me some clarification on like how is it tied to anarchist economics.
Thank you. For Rojava, so I know that they are democratically controlled, the forest arm. There's both women group and men group. I don't know much more, but what I know is that there's a lot of report by the USA, France, because what they did was amazing. So they were, they tried also to understand how they managed to fight ISIS in this region, because there's a lot of complication. So I can't say more, but what I know is that it works pretty well. Of course, you have dynamic of power, you have delegates, but they are revocable. They can be removed. Build legitimacy. I didn't really understood. How some people have more time to put in like a political. Yes. I think it's a really good question, and not that good. Yeah, we have to be aware of this kind of dynamic, and that's why we want to have switching role, like avoid that it's always the same people doing the same thing. And what we, for instance, in the alumni association that I am in, we want that each year people change working group, so that we avoid it's always the same that knows everything, and there is also sharing of experience. So I think that's one of the tool that can be used to avoid this. Against economics, I don't know much. The thing is, like, I wanted to put economics in the title so that it's easier to convince David to do the seminar. No, I cannot. But when you read about economics, there's first disillusion against economics. If there's a book, an article from Graeber, again, sorry to mention him a lot, but it's called Against Economics, and he explained how like the confusion that was brought by economists. Like today, people doesn't understand inflation. People doesn't understand money creation. People doesn't like, the school of thoughts have created more confusion and more issues than it has solved, because it became something in itself that is talking to itself, and we forgot the roots of economics, which is making achieving the basic needs, building good humans. Like he explained also the thing about. So when you have a wage, now you measure the value of your work towards the wage level. So you have a wage level, and if it's high, your work is good. So we completely forgot why we are working and how what kind of interest it can bring us. Yeah, so I don't know much on that. There's if you want, I'm going to share my my mail with your question, where I have material that I can share with you. You can also dig it yourself.
You didn't really answer to Chitnan's question, but I think you already answered it yourself in some way, I guess, because I don't know, maybe you can, if you want to elaborate, because I think, because you were talking about like elders and that it's to some level, it's like for you maybe also a legitimate thing to respect your elders, but then there's the point where it stops. So either I give it back to you and you can talk, or I give it back to you and you can talk a little bit about like how do you realize this moment? Because I think when you have the experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, really personal how that unfolds for everyone, but just saying that, I mean, it's like, I think that's something that is really common is like having a curfew of being like back at home at this point, and that's trying to protect you. But then is it really just trying to protect you if it's the same for a girl child or like a boy? Or, I mean, it unfolds in many, many different forms, but then at one point it becomes not so okay, and it becomes not legitimate anymore. So like, isn't then like, and that also applies to like so many examples of the crime thing that we were talking about. You can have systems to solve it, but then at some point it becomes not so okay, and then you have a hierarchy under anarchism that exists and is not okay anymore. So how do you then overthrow such a system under anarchist thought?
We have 5 minutes left, so it's not going to get to everyone's comments.
Sorry, maybe I'll give it to you next. Okay, I'll go quick. Mine is more of a comment. I'm Haley. I won't say where I'm from. I think you can guess from my accent. But I just wanted to comment on the Rojava element, because I think it's an interesting one to bring into this conversation from the perspective of kind of a grassroots movement for kind of creating a space for Kurds that have been long oppressed. But I think it's really important to differentiate that from the actions of the autonomous administration in Syria that you mentioned. And I think a good example or place to do that is when you look at like the way they've treated people that were kind of in places that were controlled by ISIS. There's like 50,000 people living in camps right now that is under the purview of the SDF and the autonomous administration. So I think it's a good place to also look at, the question of where does kind of something that has anarchist maybe motivations or potentialities, when it becomes a state, how does it then oppress other people? And so yeah, just to kind of nuance that, and I think it's one where it's a little bit more complicated. Thank you.
Should we? Okay. My name is Talal. I think I'm just going to be following up on Haley's point as well. And I think going back to a point that was mentioned in the presentation, I think this is where skepticism maybe about anarchism happens, because anarchism is about no hierarchy and like dismantling all types of hierarchy and institutions in a way. But I kind of feel somehow that it gives an unconventional way for the rise of another or different types of institutions. And if we're going to be talking about the case of Syria, for instance, and we're talking about it as a case of anarchism, yes, like the institution has failed, which is probably at that time we're going to talk about Assad's regime or the state. But I felt it reorganized in unconventional types of institutions, because now people started reorganizing, but based on sectarians. And this like religions or being sectarian regimes. So this created like new institutions, and then they start having a hierarchy within like these institutions that they have formed. So my question would be like, do anarchy dismantle hierarchies, or it's just a form to recreate a just unconventional or non-uniform types of hierarchy? So,
It builds on it, but in a very different way, which is that I've noticed often in situations where you don't have formal rules about who can do what, you still have informal and internalized rules, particularly, for example, in the gender dynamic. If there's no rules for how many people of which gender speak, there tends to be a dominance of males, or just of people who feel more confident. In the same way, if there's no rule, I don't know, in the rotor of a flat share who does the cleaning, there's certain types of people who will feel more that they should do cleaning. So I think it's also always really important to talk about, like, what does it mean to freely choose to do something, and that, like, the kind of question of freedom is also kind of quite complicated, because people are like socialized to be different and to have different sensations of when they should feel obliged or what they'd like to do or should do.
This is like the positive and negative rights. Oh, sorry. I don't know how to do this.
Hello. Actually, my point is also related to Haley's and Talal's, because the reason why I'm like, when it comes to some success stories like Wikipedia and other things, like I see that anarchism is really working. But when it comes to making establishment, like, and the example was about Kurdish armed forces, or like Kurdistan. I don't know how to politically correct say this, but like I am becoming very skeptical, because like to overcome regional suppression, they basically get support from other bigger imperialist powers, and we know that like they are supported, like how they can be armed. Of course, they potentially cannot produce very high technology arms, so mostly it's US, like NATO arms, and especially we cannot imagine like beating ISIS with knives or like simple things. So it's obviously like very high technology NATO arms, and so you start to like to become an establishment in current world systems. You start to be aligned for other alternative power, superpower, in order to I don't know, protect you with this initiative at least. But then how, like, is it possible to become an establishment in this current world systems without playing the interest of other bigger powers? Like, I feel like it's probably the biggest question. Like, it's like, yeah, for me, that's where skepticism starts.
Do you want it? We keep rolling.
Thank you. There is also hierarchy, some kind of when it comes to fields, and I want to ask about is there any kind of evolutionary perspective when it comes to anarchy? Because right now, even like considering all these comments and being like more into behavioral economics, I can see like why anarchy is not kind of possible. First, we have different kind of constraints when it comes to mental constraints. Like if you look like a micro level, why like we have informal rules? Because we need some kind of predictability. We need like rules, norms, and these hierarchies, because we are not able to really predict. We are really short-term oriented, and in order to survive with this kind, we need this kind of some kind of rules which are not written, but we try to codify it later. And also, even the fact that information constraints, I feel like why we say about our countries, and which later becomes a hierarchy, but again, it's like information constraint, information asymmetry. And we use this kind of countries in order to show that we have some kind of credibility to bring some kind of perspective. And after that, it builds some kind of hierarchy. Again, it's not, and about talking, like there are a lot of perspectives which I could include, but I feel like I'll just postpone it. But generally speaking, like I feel like even how we, our humans, behave and everything is like about optimization, and this kind of hierarchy is not avoidable. And I'm really curious to know whether there is like kind of consideration of this kind of evolutionary and behavioral part of it, of anarchy, and like even how we started this discussion about bifurcation and complexity, even like emergence of order from complexity. I feel like it is not avoidable. We try to make it, but even like how we behave internally from like internally is like becomes hierarchy, unfortunately.
Hi. So actually, yeah, I will also like overturn the conventional structure here and actually answer some points here, specifically about the commons, because this is what I've been working on a bit. And I think this is the commons is a really interesting topic to bring into discussions of anarchism, because I think in many ways they're extremely compatible. And you know, one of the questions posed with this problem of like, well, if it's this individualist approach, how do we avoid the tragedy of the commons, et cetera? But the findings from initially Ostrom, but then many other people who've studied the commons, is precisely that the commons are these institutions that emerge organically from groups of self-governed individuals without an external authority imposing a structure. And not only are they able to come up with these institutions to self-govern, but they're often much more effective than kind of top-down or like remotely imposed structures. So the commons can in many ways be seen as rather actually a practice in some ways of this kind of ideal of anarchism, of these organic structures. And there are rules and institutions and even hierarchies, but again, they're like functional hierarchies. They're not arbitrary sources of authority, and I think this is really what anarchism opposes, is rather arbitrary authority and not any kind of authority. There's also been, I think you all presented some dimensions of system dynamics and complexity, and this has been brought up in a few other points. And I think this is also an interesting thing to discuss in relationship to anarchism. Because you have this, I think there's this one distinction when you're talking about like the bifurcation and system dynamics between the logics of perpetuation of a system and the logics of emergence of a system. And I think the logics of perpetuation that anarchist theory offers are very convincing. This idea of like the revolution of everyday life and like the way you reproduce individuals and things like this. And you can see that if you've ever been involved in like these anarchist activist spaces, you can see how these are very effective and produce these individuals who can live out these dynamics. But I think a point that's been raised in a few places is that there is this challenge of using these kind of rules of these principles of anarchism as a way to change or contest the logics of perpetuation of the capitalist global system and produce something else that can emerge. And that this is, I think this is one of you kind of highlighted this being the difference between the communist and anarchist approach, the ideas of what kind of organizational forms are necessary to overturn the current system and then reach this final stage where there is more agreement. But yeah, I think there was a really good point about this in terms of like the kind of global system of like nation states and the military industrial complex and things like this, but also just the capitalist economy. And I think this problem that Lenin highlights in The State and Revolution is still this perpetual problem of like, what do we do with, like, how do we, how would you, through an anarchist perspective, deal with the fact that perhaps a large portion of society is still invested in private property rights, in exploitation, and will violently defend these bourgeois structures? Do you just let them do that, or do you use authority? Do you like what's the kind of anarchist response? And this is something what's the anarchist response to the problem of the remaining kind of bourgeois interests and bourgeois classes, or like large portions of society who will violently organize themselves to maintain or defend their property relationships?
Okay, I'm sorry if I do not answer everybody, but I'm going to answer you first. Yeah, I think it's very important. Like, where individualism is interesting is yourself. You understand how anti-feministic can be this authority. So yourself understand, and you are enough. You don't need intermediaries in order to help you, in order to understand that. You can do it yourself. And I think you're the most well-placed people to try to tackle this issue. Like I won't have a. But what would say an anarchist is like direct action. You don't need a specific institution. You don't have to wait somebody to do it for yourself. You can do it yourself, and you can try to tackle this issue yourself. If there is water scarcity, and you know that you have a lot of bourgeois people that have a swimming pool, like, don't wait a new left party to take the water to augment the tax. Get the water with your friend, and that's the issue. Like, do it yourself. Like, we don't need a structure and intermediaries. Concerning norms and efficiency, I do agree with you. Like, I'm not saying like there's a big difference between anomia, which means no rules, and anarchy. That's completely different. Like, of course, if we are a group of friends, we want to do soccer together. We want to play football. We're going to say, okay, this is the line of touch. This is the goal, and we play like this. We choose the rule together. That's more this. Like, we have social norms, and we need them. But how to democratically choose those norms or question those norms? On Rojava, I completely agree with what has been said. There's also probably heard about with the Arab communities that have been repressed by some people there, and I think it's a movement. It's definitely, that's why it's interesting to have a look on what kind of failures and problems they have. They changed their name. They understood that it has to be a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional organization. And as you said, you have a representative, like delegate of Arab community of Syrian that participate to political councils. Concerning efficiency, yeah, it's too long. I don't want to. Afterwards, we can talk about this. There was another thing. What? Oh, wait, alternative power. So if you have this kind of new community, Rojava is dependent in a way to USA and everything. I do agree. That's a question of like opportunities. Like, how do you do? How do you do? Like, if you take Pan-Africanist movement, you have a lot of Pan-Africanist movement, especially the French one. that leave France. There's a guy called Kemi Saba that represents this movement in what is called Pan-Africa, France Africa, and he explained that in order to be less, of course, we are less dependent on France, and you have Russia arriving, you have China arriving, and of course, in sometimes you would create some trade agreement stuff, because that's the only solution. And that's why I think one of the powerful arguments of Pan-Africanists is the multipolarity, like augment the different poles of power, like and that brings I think a lot of solution. When you have a world where you have China against Russia, and when you're a country from global south, you have to choose between both. That's not cool. If you have more actors on which we can rely on, you have more arguments. You have you have more power basically.
You've already had a go. No, you wanted to go. You've already been. Anyone new? I'll give it back to Charlie. Huh? No?
Yeah, it's it's a much less emotionally charged point this time. So I think we can all kind of agree that within capitalism there are like thousands of different ways in which someone could feel dissatisfied with their own life or not content that they're able to achieve all that they want to achieve. But also I'm not necessarily convinced that even in an anarchic society in which everyone can do what they want to do, that they could achieve this. So I'm just going to imagine we're all in an anarchic society, and both myself and Bea are pursuing our passion of art and sculpting. Bea happens to be a lot better at this than me. And by just the natural human nature of everyone else in our society, Bea's sculptures, Bea's art just receives a bit more attention and a bit more appreciation from the community because it's just better. I'm just not very good at it, despite the fact it's my passion. I still think there are circumstances in which myself might end up resenting the rest of society or feeling a bit left out and things like this. And so I was just sort of wondering what would the anarchic perspective be on just what is essentially a basic aspect of just human nature.
Last round, yeah.
No, I just want to respond to the point that you've mentioned, because I think that's the point that I think Charlie mentioned in the beginning, anarchy and the skepticism about chaos, because you were mentioning that China and Russia would be interfering in African countries, which is true, that's what's happening right now. But if you have different powers in the same place, it leads to civil war afterwards, because you're going to find some party funded by this government and the other party funded by the other government, and it's going to be like global north trying to kind of play in the global south. I don't know if Russia and China are considered global north, but in a way, like powerful countries somehow. So, yeah.
You said everybody do what they want to do. That's the opposite of what I explained. It's not that everybody want to do what they want to do. We agree on what we can do together or not. I agree. Like Max Stirner, that wrote on individualism, explained what you said. Like we have to develop our uniqueness, emancipate our uniqueness. We're all unique, and that's super cool. And if you have a super powerful institution that impede people from having free time and having leisure, they don't cultivate this uniqueness. I think it's great to have differences. We all have differences. We don't want to be the same person. So I didn't really get afterwards. If you can explain, we can continue discussion. And the last thing was on civil war. Yeah. What I wanted to explain is that for a Pan-Africanist leader, he explained that if I can get some money from a power, Russia or China, I would get it, and I will have to question myself on how this can create an influence from him. But when you are in this kind of situation, you gotta get like resources from somewhere. That's what I said. So of course, sometimes you're gonna compromise yourself and get the resources where they are, having in mind that you can have an influence on yourself. Then I'm not an expert on that, but I do think it's better to have like multiple power than only France and what they did with the colonial power. And I think at least you have different possibilities, no? I don't know. We can have the
I think we're nearing the end. Yeah, just Andresa for finish.
Hello, I'm Andresa. My question is less ambitions in terms of thinking about a new society. I would like to know from you what are the most relevant anarchist principles that you think we could incorporate in our day-to-day lives as researchers or working in big institutions as you worked.
I think mutual aid, like helping each other. I think, like being able to see that we are not the same. Some people might have certain sensibilities. They are sensitive to something that you are not. Let's understand them and why they are sensitive and listen to each other, open to each other, democratically choose what we can democratically choose. Some stuff can't be, but for instance, the attendances or some stuff, we have more power than we think. Like we internalize the power of the state because we believe there is state. But if we stop from being dependent, we stop voting and we start to grow food and we have a solar panel at the end, the state, I don't really care. So and understand how we internalize power and how we can emancipate from it.
Thank you.